Dragon Age originally started as an attempted revival of Baldur's Gate-style CRPGs, but was followed up with a Mass Effect 2 inspired sequel which was heavily criticized for repetitive environments likely caused by a short development cycle. Despite these fair criticisms, Dragon Age 2 is a far more interesting game than its predecessor for being less steeped in generic Tolkien-esque fantasy tropes. It offered up a grounded story of a family of refugees trying to get ahead in a corrupt city on the edge of civil war. It was a game where the player was swept up by the changing forces of the world and had to choose how to deal with it, as opposed to a typical fantasy game where the player is the center of the world and personally directs it. It was a bold and fresh direction in a genre mired in childish power fantasies. Unfortunately, it seems Bioware has lost their nerve with the third game in the series, Dragon Age Inquisition, a misguided return to the oversized scale and laughably high stakes of common fantasy. The end of Dragon Age 2 left the world to suffer a civil war between the Templar Order wishing to protect the world from the unwieldy powers of magic, and the Circle of Mages who wish to liberate themselves from tyrannical Templar control. This war has led to massive amounts of destruction which have prompted the Chantry, also known as the Fantasy Catholic Church, to set up peace talks. These peace talks then explode when the player begins a new game from the main menu. It's a neat effect. The explosion kills everyone at the talks except for one, the player, who of course is blamed for the explosion, the death of Fantasy Pope, and the creation of a giant hole in the sky spewing demons across the land. The explosion, however, granted the player the ability to close the hole in the sky and prove their innocence, as well as creating a schism within the Chantry as to whether or not the player was sent by God or is just a random person who got lucky. Either way, the true culprit of the attack is hiding somewhere while the civil war rages on, with both sides blaming the other for the tragic events. With the Pope dead, a massive civil war underway, and demons ravaging the land, the remaining leaders of the Chantry call for an inquisition to restore stability in general. This is a brilliant setup for a fantasy RPG storyline, with politics and intrigue lashing out in every conceivable direction and written well enough to be easily digested. It starts out appearing as a massive wave on the horizon, ready to crash onto the shore, bringing with it violent but refreshing waters of deep thought and creativity. However, the wave is merely an illusion. The hostilities between the Templars and Mages quickly subside, with the player simply picking one of the two to win, while the side they ignore finds itself absorbed into an army of evil, led by the man who blew up the peace talks. This man happens to be an ancient evil seeking to destroy or take over the world. The player assumes leadership of the Inquisition and sets about on a grandiose quest to kill the bad guy to death and save the world. All of the complicated and interesting subject matter is wrapped up within the first few hours of the story, leaving the narrative to focus on a generic good against evil plot. It's sad, really. A story of powerful people battling against those wishing to limit their powers isn't a particularly unique premise, but a plot where the player actually deals with it and tries to solve the problems between the two sides would have had the potential to be profound. Furthermore, the religious split regarding the player never amounts to anything more than superfluous dialogue. As the player can choose to embrace the idea of being the chosen one, or be humble and deny it, it's really just a way to set up the identity of the player character, rather than really explore the religious character of the fantasy world within Dragon Age. With Bioware being one of the few game developers with full-time writing staff, it's crushing to see them throw away so much potential. Although, the strength of Bioware's storytelling has always been with the characters they create. In this regard, Dragon Age Inquisition keeps their tradition of unique, varied, and romanceable characters alive and well. To highlight a few, there's an elf racist, who happens to be an elf, a pleasant and devout warrior lady, a charming one-eyed mercenary leader, and Dorian. Of course, my heart goes to the adorable Scout Harding. Though she is not a party member, she achieves favoritism by having a grounded, but pleasant way about her. Wait, she isn't a real romance option? But no. When you're not having your heart broken by the disappointing narrative and lack of romance in your life, you can also have your heart broken by generally mundane gameplay. Clearly inspired by the Elder Scrolls series, Dragon Age Inquisition offers a swath of varied open landscapes, with quests dotting the map. The game's high graphical fidelity and high fantasy aesthetics give the game's romanticized landscapes some real staying power, but often the implementation of cliffs and mountains make the map a pain to traverse. The quality of side quests is also poor, with many of them taken from the MMO handbook. They can range from fetching 10 whatevers to killing 5 somethings. One side quest in particular asks the player to escort a fantasy buffalo, called Duffalo, across the map. As the thing moves so slow and the distance to travel is so large, it feels as though Bioware implemented this quest just to anger me. Anyway, after about half an hour I'm almost there. No. You can't. No! The first thought was to ignore these side quests and play the main quests, which are designed well enough and often deal with interesting subject matter. One involves exploring the worlds of demons and spirits, while another has the player dealing with the burden of keeping a dignified appearance at a courtly ball. However, many of the main quests are blocked off by a power requirement. Of course, you build power by completing quests. This effectively means the player must complete a number of boring side quests before they can play the genuinely fun parts of the game. As the number of main quests is actually fairly low, this implementation of forced side questing only serves to pad an otherwise short game with monotonous content. This has the effect of making the game feel boring and obnoxious as a whole, whereas if the game were shorter, it would have felt like a tightly constructed and exciting experience. Furthermore, it's puzzling why anyone would think to force players to play through boring content rather than to make interesting content a player would want to play even if they were not forced to do so. Perhaps if the base gameplay of combat were more mechanically involved, this would be more forgivable. However, combat is more or less a one-button game. Simply look at an enemy and hold down R2 until you win, only occasionally popping off health potions. There is a rather large amount of options available to the player in combat, such as party commands, craftable grenades and tonics, as well as the expected skill tree. However, the gameplay is so easy that these features feel more like methods to speed up a dull task rather than fun tools for victory. Combat rarely asks for any thoughtful implementation of these features, and as a result feels underwhelming. Underwhelming, perhaps, is a good word to describe Dragon Age Inquisition as a whole. Coming right off of the brilliant storyline of Dragon Age 2, the story of this narrative-focused game is disappointingly generic. Mundane side quests and a progression system forcing the player to trudge through them undermine the otherwise well-done main quests. On top of these tragedies, combat is simply unsatisfying. It's not a horrible game. It's definitely worth a look if it can be procured cheaply, but there are much better RPGs available right now.
Sorry about that. Archdemons like to crush, you know. Can't be helped. Am I speaking too quickly for you?
I was distracted, that's all.